to this story. The Western Cape High Court is set to hear arguments today on why Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana should be interdicted from implementing a VAT increase. The Democratic Alliance, with the support from the economic freedom fighters, will argue that the minister's announcement of a VAT hike to 15.5% from the 1st of May is unconstitutional. They contend that the process through which Parliament adopted the fiscal framework was flawed and chaotic. The parties maintain that the power to impose taxes lies with Parliament, not the minister. Minister Godongwana is opposing the application, arguing that it lacks a legal merit. He says that failing to raise VAT would result in a significant gap between government revenue and expenditure. The DA and the EFF are asking the court to refer the fiscal framework back to Parliament before the VAT increase takes effect. Well, to unpack the court papers and what's expected in today's proceedings, we are now joined by Newzroom Afrika's Qaanitah. Qaanitah, very good morning to you. So there is the political field and then there's the legal field. So let's deal with what's happening in the legal field. The minister, of course, opposing this application that has been brought by the Democratic Alliance. And what is the Democratic Alliance saying about what this case is not about?
Yeah, so the Democratic Alliance says this is not them asking the court to adjudicate whether VAT increase or taxes are good or not for South Africa and whether or not South Africa needs it or not. They said that's not what they are going to the Western High Court to adjudicate on. What they are saying is that we are here to challenge a process which they claim is completely and utterly unconstitutional. Now, we have to go back to that meeting of the Finance Committee that discussed it, and there was the process in which the fiscal framework was discussed. The question is whether that amendment that was not actually an amendment about whether VAT would be reconsidered.
A recommendation.
The recommendation.
The other word that they use, yeah.
And so the Democratic Alliance telling the court that there's no such, and that the minister cannot impose taxes by himself, and that it is actually Parliament that would have had to vote it firstly in that committee on that report and then taken it into the House of Parliament to vote. Now, it's a procedural measure that they say is unconstitutional, but they said the first part of it is that they have to interdict the minister from raising VAT on the 1st of May. Now, a bone of contention, Aldrin, is the argument of the Democratic Alliance that once a VAT increase imposed, it is irreversible. And that is supported by the economic freedom fighters in their intervening application to say it's no such thing that the minister can then come back and say, well, it's off the table. And when you look closely at the minister's papers, Aldrin, he says that the DA says in their replying affidavit that that there's no way that the minister denies in his affidavit to the court that the VAT hike, once in effect, would be reversible. And so that's an interesting one. The minister in his papers says that he has the powers, that the process was completely above board. And quite interestingly, he calls the Democratic Alliance opportunistic. He argues that the DA is trying to argue in the courts a case that it lost in the legislature.
Yeah, and here's the thing is, once again, the minister has mentioned this before, that the DA was willing to support a VAT increase on the basis if there are certain concessions that the ANC, the Government of National Unity, is willing to make. But that's not part of the contention here. The issue is the VAT increase, the process that was followed by the Finance Committee, and also looking at the constitutionality of Section 7 of the VAT Act.
Absolutely. And so the minister points to that. He also seeks to downplay the consequences of the VAT increase on the price of food and the poor, saying consistently that if this increase is not effected, there will be this disjuncture and this misalignment, as the minister says, between revenue collected and the expenses of the state. And so the minister, sticking to it, saying that the VAT increase needs to be effected. And so that's a very different assertion from what was the process in Parliament, because in that committee, the assumption was that the fiscal framework will be passed, the minister will then find a way to plug in that 13 billion rand shortfall and then come up with the solution. That's not how the minister looks at it. He looks at it and says, you know, this is what we need. Yeah. And referring to his speech, his contentious speech in Parliament, where he says he justified the need for a VAT increase. Again, the Democratic Alliance says to the court that this is not about what the government needs or not. This is not whether a tax hike is the only way Parliament or the state can raise revenue. This is about a flawed process, which they insist is unconstitutional.
Just quickly, before we conclude, we had a conversation with Ethel Trollip from Action SA about this, which is one of the interviews that the EFF is also citing in their application. And what's evident from what Ethel Trollip was saying is that the negotiations will happen, and then we are going to try and find an alternative before the 1st of May. Of course, there's another issue around whether the fiscal framework was adopted or not adopted in the recommendation that we were speaking about earlier on. But the impression that we got from the ANC as well was that a committee, which include the chief whip of the ANC, Mdumiseni Ntuli, will look into trying to find this alternative. That's what's being shared with the public. But the minister is saying that as far as he's concerned, and if you have any loans, if you are in the financial space, perhaps maybe you have a contract with any company, you would have received a message that says that VAT will increase to 15.5% come the 1st of May. So politically speaking, what's happening?
The political process is neither here nor there, and that's the case that's argued both by the Democratic Alliance and the EFF, that whatever happens outside of a constitutionally empowered parliamentary process is all that matters. So it doesn't matter that somebody in the committee said, well, we'll revisit this later and we will recommend that this matter will go to a political negotiation later. What matters is the report adopted or not? And if the report was adopted, was that a constitutional process or not? The Speaker of the National Assembly, Togo Didiza, saying in the court that the process was above board, and that she's saying that this is something that the Democratic Alliance fought within the legislature and then failed because essentially Parliament voted on the passing of the fiscal framework. And so the question now is how much of the ministers sort of sticking to the gun will go, will sort of go against the ANC insofar as reviewing the VAT increase. But the sticking point is that the proposal by Action SA that we pass the fiscal framework and go back to a negotiating table is just completely neither here nor there.
Well, they had been warned. But anyway, thank you so much, Qaanitah Hunter, on that story, the application that has been brought by the Democratic Alliance as well as the EFF.